welcome to the Modern Leader Podcast. This is a podcast on a mission to discover what the modern leader looks like. We sit down with some of the best leadership minds to hear how they've been challenged, how they think and feel, but most importantly, what they've learned. My name is Brookline, and I'm your host. Our first guest has built a career at one of the UK's largest high street retailers, now due to start in his new role at a leading housing association as Chief Information Officer. I've been so excited to have him on, as I know he has a lot to offer listeners. CIO, family man, school governor, and our first guest ever on the Modern Leader Podcast, Guv Dhaliwal. Welcome, Guv.
Thanks for the amazing intro. Pleased to be here.
No problem. Firstly, congrats on a new role.
Thank you.
I'm sure it's a nice feeling knowing that you don't have to interview anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the process has been quite interesting. It's been, as you say, lots of interviews, lots of conversations, actually really just more networking than interviews, but it's been great because I think I've opened myself up to the industry in terms of building my network, and you get to talk about your achievements a lot, which is actually something you don't do a lot when you're in a role, unfortunately. So it's been interesting.
I mean, it's a super competitive market at the moment, and it really is a job in itself, finding a job at this level. But we've been chatting a lot over the last few months whilst in your transitional period, and I'd be confident in saying we've had some fairly interesting chats, share similar views and values, authenticity being one that I'm sure we'll get into a little later on. But what I'm interested in understanding, Guv, is a little bit about your background and your journey so far to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite an open question, but let me just talk a little bit about my background and where I found a way through to where I am now. So, as a child, I never really saw myself growing up to be in the corporate world. I never really saw myself as somebody who could potentially lead people. I grew up in a fairly, I guess now what I understand to be a fairly underprivileged background, son of first generation immigrants, disabled dad. Grew up in a council estate in South East London, although I don't sound it anymore. I moved away from there when I was 9. And I never really had anybody around me that was in the corporate world really to show me the way or bring me into that. So I'd always assumed that my parents pushed me down the route of having your own business, so learn a trade somewhere and have your own business. And I think pharmacy was intended to be that for me. I started out life as a pharmacist. My intent was to be a pharmacist and then maybe go out on my own, either as a locum or having my own business. But I did, before you become a pharmacist, you have to do a year in industry. It's called the pre-registration year, and I did that in a store in Boots, and I worked for a brilliant store manager who was my tutor as well, a lady called Kate Lacey, who was a really commercially astute lady and just a good leader of people and a retail expert. And I don't know whether she saw something in me or whether she just had a passion for that. She kind of started nudging me towards the retail leadership side of things, towards the commercial side of things, which I grabbed with both hands, actually. I realised that I really enjoyed it. And that was the start of my career in management that grew into moving into head office and getting various leadership roles that eventually became as a technology leader. So that was kind of the journey from beginnings where I didn't really think I would end up in this position and a route that took me through that.
Uh-huh. What was it that you think she saw in you?
You know what, I'm not really sure, because if I look back now, and I didn't understand this at the time, but what I see now is, to begin with, I found the corporate world quite difficult to get to grips with. So coming from the background that I did, and the various different factors, and I'm speaking for myself here, not for anybody else, and also just to say that my parents did a fantastic job of raising all three of us, their children, best that they could. But I did find it difficult getting to grips with the corporate world. I almost felt a little bit of, at the start of it, I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome. I felt that I didn't really fit in. Couldn't really participate in some of the conversations that were happening there. And it took me quite a while to settle. So for her to have spotted something and kind of nurtured and guided me through that was just brilliant of her, because I think it helped me settle. And then the same thing happened again when I moved from the stores business into what we now call the support office, the head office of Boots, where my line manager at the time, a lady called Linda, who really took me under her wing and showed me the ropes. I think if I didn't have that, I think the whole getting to grips with the corporate world would have been quite a difficult thing for me.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I remember feeling the same leaving school, moving into the corporate world. I remember none of my friends at the time went to university. We all got jobs, corporate jobs or trades. But I do remember feeling imposter syndrome in my first corporate job. But what was the point for you when it really clicked?
Yeah, I think I stayed in that imposter syndrome place for quite a while. And I think, if I'm really honest, I think looking back, even through university and previous times, I think I've always had a bit of that. And it's something that I've kind of battled with over the years. And I'm you know, it's something that isn't there as prominently as it used to be. But I think, I honestly think the support I got from the likes of Kate and Linda to really help. But I also think that my way of dealing with it was building one-on-one relationships. So I didn't feel, in the early days, I didn't feel confident enough to get involved in the broader conversations. I remember being a store manager quite young. So when Kate kind of pushed me down the leadership route, I was a store manager from the first day I qualified as a pharmacist, which isn't the route you normally go. But I remember going into leadership meetings, a 22-year-old guy from my background, going into leadership meetings with far more experienced people than me. And, you know, for me to then pipe up and have conversations in those rooms and drive some of the conversations was quite difficult. So I think I focused on one-on-one relationships, building those one-on-one relationships, finding points of connection, and then expanding on those. And that was the way I think I built that confidence in myself to then realize that actually I do belong here and I can do something.
What do you think is the best piece of advice you received?
I think there's a clear winner here. I think, and I've received this from advice from various places, and it was around authenticity, being the best version of you that you can. I think, I've just talked a bit about how I grew through my career and how I felt a bit of imposter syndrome. I do think early on in my career, and this is going to sound a bit strange, but I think I created a work version of me that I put out there in the corporate world, and there was a different version of me at home. That might sound odd to some people, particularly the Gen Zs coming through. That authenticity is often an important part of the corporate world. But I've done a lot of coaching with people on leadership development programs at Walgreens Boots Alliance, and I did find this theme that was quite common amongst a lot of people that I worked with around feeling that you have to be a certain way at work. And I certainly, when I was younger, I felt that way. And I think some leaders might have spotted that. I remember I was partnering the director of pharmacy at the time, and I was quite young, and I tried to speak a certain way, be a certain way. I think I had in my head what an IT leader should be like. And I think he spotted that because he gave me some direct feedback to say, I don't know what Guv stands for. I don't know the true Guv. You've got to open yourself up. And at the same time, there was a chap who sat next to me, a guy called Ray Jones, and he may or may not be listening, I don't know. But he was a program manager, but also an exec coach. And he used to sit next to me, and he used to often just throw in the odd little snippet of a question that would just leave me pondering for the rest of the afternoon. It was infuriating, but great as well. And it really drove me to think about myself. And he used to talk to me about authenticity and being the true you. And the point we talked about was I used to get a lot of feedback about, from various places, about coming across as too laid back. I'm quite a laid back person, but I think people that are far away from me and don't know me might have seen that as not showing a lot of passion. And I tried to deal with that feedback, and I created a really kind of a false image of myself and urgency. And I think people saw that, and the conversations with Ray pushed me towards what's Guv's way of showing passion. Don't try and copy other people. What's your way, and how are you gonna position yourself, and how are you gonna behave, and how do you become the best version of you that you can possibly be? And that was a game changer for me. That was when I realized that I've got to be very. It's not enough to be aware of what I am, but you've got to accept what you are, and then you got to lead in that way, and that was huge for me.
Mm-hmm. I think authenticity is really important. It's something that I talk about a lot, and try and figure out for myself. And I read a really interesting article recently, actually, about authenticity, and it suggested authenticity is all about understanding your values, your internal motivators, embracing your strengths, but also figuring out what you're not so good at. But how did you use it to be a better leader?
Yeah. So there were a lot of things that built on those conversations with various people that I just talked about, and I think understanding your value set is probably one of the most important things you can do. And I was very lucky in Boots to have access to a coach who helped me through this process to understand what my values are, understand what my strengths are, and understand what my learned strengths are, things that I can do quite well but don't like doing. So you really understand where your energy is, and you try to be in those places where your energy is the most. But understanding your value set is possibly the most important thing you can do. And a little way of looking at this is, so the coach I worked with, a guy called Matt Radley, he pointed me to a book, and it's called A Peacock in the Land of Penguins, and I can't remember who it's by. I wish I could remember. And they openly say that, this is the books that they write are like children's books for adults, and it is written in that way. They're written like children's books, but the themes in them are around development and growth. And the thing in this book is that people exist in two states. You're a peacock or a penguin, and what penguins do is they take the stimulus from the outside world, bring it all in, and they act on that stimulus and try to be what the world's telling them to be. Whether that might be feedback from one of your stakeholders, whatever it may be, they try to be what that feedback's telling them to be. And that's a really unhappy place to be. And it's also something that you can just never achieve because you can't be everything to everybody. And quite often that's what happens in corporate organisations is people believe, like I did, the younger version of me, that you have to be a certain way. What a peacock does is understand what they are, understand their values, understand what's important to them, and radiate that out to the world. And whenever they get any feedback, any stimulus from the outside world telling them to do something, they will match that against their value set and see, is this congruent with who I am? And am I going to do something about it? And it's a choice. And I guess through all of this feedback about authenticity, through all of this these conversations with the coach, I think what I realised was you got to be more peacock. And when you are acting in that way, the authenticity shines through, and people really get to know you. And even the vulnerable side of you, and find points of connection with you in your team.
Guv, I know diversity inclusion is important to you. I guess my question is, what is it that you're doing in your role to improve diversity? But also, why is diversity important?
Yeah, so I talked a bit about earlier on about how coming from a very specific background, I often found the corporate world hard to access. I found it hard to be a part of. So I think for me, it's really important to make the corporate world a bit more accessible for people like me or not like me, right? So why is it important? Actually, do you know what? I actually really enjoy being part of diverse teams. One of the happiest times in my life was a team that just felt very diverse and meeting very different peoples, having my mindset challenged, having my way of doing things challenged was really, really, really enjoyable. And I think we achieved great things as a team as well. But I think in terms of improving diversity in an organisation, I think you have to be really deliberate. I think you have to measure, you have to baseline, you have to drive insight, you have to plan, and then you have to measure again to see whether you're doing what you're doing. In terms of being important to me, I think, and people that I talk to about this a lot will be probably sick of me saying this, but it's a phrase I use quite a lot, is I've walked a certain path to where I've got to, right? So I came from an underprivileged background, and the fact that I'm talking to you today, Brooke, sure, there is a level of privilege in my life now in some areas that will pass on to my daughters as well, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. The question is, what are you going to do with your privilege? And my job now is I've walked a certain path to get to where I've got to. My job is now to walk to strengthen that path for others. Some people call it sending the lift back down, whatever it may be. And that doesn't mean, I'm just going to go out and hire a bunch of people like me. What it means for me is any organisation that I work in, I will strive to create a culture that welcomes people from all walks of life and helps them settle in and access it really well. And I want to do away with phrases like, you'll have heard it, we've all heard it, will they fit the culture here? When you're recruiting somebody, will they fit in the culture here? I'm going to flip that and say, how can they come in and take our culture somewhere else, somewhere new? How can they improve us? And I think those little things that we do every day and we say every day just make the corporate world a little bit less accessible to people. And I think we've got to flip that.
Do you think it's a superpower?
Is it a superpower? Diversity, working on diversity.
Yeah, exactly. There must be something inside of you which is a driver and a motivator to want to make a change.
Yeah, I've in the last period of time that I've been in between roles, I've been to quite a few networking events and met a lot of other IT leaders, and it feels like you reach a certain point in your career that you feel like you feel a need to give something back, and I'm not alone in that. I hear people say that a lot, and I think I've really enjoyed my career to date, and I hope I'll continue to enjoy it for as long as I'm working. But I am at a point now where I feel like there are probably people that were like me 20 odd years ago that are need a bit of support and help to just even access this world. I do sometimes wonder if I didn't have that certificate that said I was a pharmacist, how successful would I have been in getting a role in a corporate world? Because being a pharmacist was almost like a pass to get you in. I don't know if I walked the walk, talked the talk, whatever it was what was required back in those days. To get through the door on my own steam, and I just want to make sure that people don't walk away and get disillusioned. So yes, it is a point of passion for me. Call it a superpower, but it is a point of passion.
Mm. Do you think it is a top-down approach then?
Oh, it has to be. It has to be. I've worked for some great leaders in my time who really, really understand this and really strive for equity. I'll use the word equity, not equality. Really strive for diverse organisations and equity and inclusion. And you can tell the difference between those that really believe it and really understand that it's the right thing to do and come from a great moral standpoint. And you can tell the ones that it's a tick box exercise. And I'm not saying that there are many of those out there, but people aren't stupid, right? So people in the organisation as a whole will look up at the leadership and they will understand whether something is important or not, and how the leadership talks about something, how they talk about it with passion or not, will absolutely percolate down the organisation and have an impact or not.
Mm-hmm. Winning hearts and minds is something that we all do in some way, shape or form, whether it be in professional, personal, and getting people to buy into you is important in moving forward in all aspects of life.
Yeah.
Can you tell me how you've influenced won hearts and minds and successfully gained that buy-in through your career?
Yeah, I think. I think for me, I think to get that buy-in with people, I think you have to build trust. That's kind of like the first and foremost, and you have to build a mutual respect as well. And you sometimes have to do things that are going to make you less liked, right? So likability, for example, isn't a thing that's always going to be there. So you can't rely on winning hearts and minds through likability. I think as long as you've got a mutual trust with your people, and as long as you've got some a mutual respect with your people, I think there are ways and means that you can move forward and win hearts and minds, regardless of the situation that you're in. Is that where you were going with that question?
Yeah, I think so. I think likability, and I think it's an interesting one with likability. You talk about trust, and they aren't the same thing, are they? I think mostly improving likability can come through things like selflessness and acts of kindness, popularity, showing an interest in someone, asking them how they are, even humour. Trust is, in my opinion, much harder to obtain. And I guess you can be liked but not trusted. But do you think you can be trusted but not liked?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you can. And I'll give an example, right? So, by the way, I think likability does help you move so far, but you do need other stuff with that, of course, to deliver. But in terms of trust, I've been in positions in my career where I've had to make decisions that will not go down well, have not gone down well with the team as a whole, but the things that are needed for the success of the business. And I think in those situations, you might not be liked. And that's just a fact, right? You might not be liked in those situations, and it's very hard. And actually, in those situations, it's not about you, it's about them. And me having a desire to be liked is a bit self-centered, I think. kind of feels a little bit self-centered. So I think in those situations, the only things you can do is treat people with dignity and respect and be really transparent so that there's a trust there as well. Trust comes from transparency in delivery, right? So if you can build that trust and respect and dignity by treating them in a certain way. I call this a supermarket test, by the way. So if you've ever had to make a tough decision with people and you've been transparent all the way through, so there is a trust that you are going to do what you say you're going to do, and you've treated them with respect and you've treated them with dignity, you should be able to bump into them in a supermarket without feeling awkward. And if you can do that, then I think you've done the best you can possibly do by them. And I think in those situations, you can be trusted and respected, but potentially not liked. That's kind of my take on that point.
It's a really good way of visualizing it. My final question I wanted to understand from you, Guv, was where in your career did the mindset flip from technical expertise and understanding, being the best techie in the room, to emotional intelligence and empathy? What were your drivers? And why is it important for a modern leader to make this transition? Yeah.
So firstly, I can never confess to being the best techie in the room. I don't come from a technical background. I know enough. But yeah, just before any of my former colleagues kind of pipe up and start commenting, saying, "Hang on." So look, I think the days where being really, really good at your job got your promotion to become the leader in that team are probably gone now, right? So you can get so far in your career doing that. I think as a leader, you need a lot more. You need 2 parts emotional intelligence for every 1 part technical understanding at the very least. I think the way I'll put it, I guess, is technical understanding gets you so far. So if your team, for example, needs some support on something and they need a problem unblocking, you need to have, as a leader, enough technical understanding to understand when to get down into the details and support them and unblock something. That is a given. You need to have enough technical understanding to do that. But the bit that some people forget is you need to have the emotional intelligence to understand when to get out, because otherwise you're in their way. And the reason I say that is there's a spectrum, right, between micromanaging with one side, empowering in the middle, and abandoning at the end. And if you get that getting back out a bit wrong, you're somewhere on that spectrum. There's a fine line between micromanaging, empowering, and abandoning. And you want to get in them. You want to get out at the right time to get to that empowering stage. And that's where emotional intelligence gets in, because people don't always ask for help. People don't always tell you to get back out because you're in the way. That's something as a leader you need to understand. I think that's something that when I got all this feedback about authenticity and being the real me and opening myself up, I think my leadership style became a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more proactive. I think up to that point, I was probably leading with my gut a lot more. I was just responding to situations that unfolded in front of me. And then as I started to grow with experience and having some brilliant leaders around me who gave me advice and coaching and then the actual business coaches that I had access to, I think I became a lot more deliberate and proactive about my leadership. And I think that was when the flip happened to, actually, I don't need to be the most knowledgeable person in the room about the topic we're talking about. I need to bring some other skills to help the team be far more successful than they could have been without that.
So just on that, actually, I just something that just kind of pops into my head as you were speaking. I think for somebody that is in a role at the moment that perhaps isn't, doesn't have those kind of external coaches, doesn't have the that mentoring, how would you say that somebody would go about making that kind of mindset transition
to receiving coaching?
No, more. How can somebody go about it that is in a role at the moment without the coaching, without the support? How can somebody go about going through that mindset shift?
Yeah, I think it is very hard to make that step without the appropriate support network. I tried to do it on my own for quite a while before I had the access to the people that I talked about previously. I think you have to go and seek it out. I think you have to look around your organisation, your industry, and wider to see who you admire, whose style do you admire, and where do you want to learn, and just approach people. And you'll often find people are more than willing to give their time. And sometimes, coaching or mentoring doesn't have to feel as formal as that. It could just be as simple as a coffee and a chat. I've had coffees and chats with lots of people over the years who we've had. In reality, when I look back at the conversations, they were mutual mentoring conversations. We're both learning and taking something away from that. So I would just advise, build your network, and don't limit your network to just your organisation. Go broader, build your network, and seek out the people that you want to learn from. And you may well have something to offer as well. I'm pretty sure of it.
Guv, those are all my questions. Thank you so much for your time today and joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for the invite. I've really enjoyed today, actually. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, I think that was it. How did that feel?
Actually, that was good. It was a lot more natural than I was kind of worried it wasn't going to feel natural.